The day had finally come, a day that the young Marine had dreamed of for years. From the moment he first enlisted, he knew that graduation would not just be a ceremony, it would be the culmination of years of hard work, discipline, and sacrifice. He had woken up early, his uniform neatly pressed, the medals and insignias gleaming under the morning sunlight. His heart was racing with a mix of nerves and excitement. Today was not just about him. It was about his family, his friends, and everyone who had believed in him when the road was tough and the nights were long. As he made his way to the ceremony, he couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The early mornings, the grueling physical training, the endless drills, and the constant pressure to push beyond limits, it had all tested him in ways he had never imagined. There were times when he felt exhausted, moments when self-doubt crept in, and days when he wondered if he could really make it through. But he had persevered, not just for himself, but for the honor of serving his country and for the pride of those who had supported him along the way. Family members were already gathering near the ceremony hall, their faces glowing with anticipation. His parents, who had sacrificed so much to give him opportunities, stood among the crowd, eyes shining with pride. His siblings were whispering excitedly to each other, clutching cameras and phones to capture every moment. Friends from his hometown had made the journey, cheering loudly, their enthusiasm contagious. Everywhere he looked, he saw familiar faces filled with hope, encouragement, and admiration. This was more than a graduation. It was a celebration of courage, resilience, and determination. As he stepped onto the grounds, he noticed the rows of Marines lined up, each one wearing the same uniform but each carrying a story of their own. There was a shared sense of purpose, a silent bond that connected them all, forged through months of hard work and unyielding discipline. The air was thick with anticipation, the hum of conversation blending with the distant sound of ceremonial music. He could feel the energy of the crowd, the collective heartbeat of a community that respected dedication and honored achievement. The Marine took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. Despite the excitement, there was a quiet moment of reflection in his mind. He thought of the mentors who had guided him, the instructors who had challenged him, and the friends who had stood by him through the toughest days. Each of them had contributed to the Marine he had become, shaping him into someone strong, resilient, and ready for whatever came next. He knew that the ceremony was more than just a symbol. It was a recognition of all those countless hours of sweat, determination, and sacrifice. As the ceremony began, the Marine felt a surge of emotion. Pride, relief, and joy mixed together, creating a feeling he would never forget. He could hear the speeches, the applause, and the cheers, but his focus remained on the significance of the moment. This was his achievement, his triumph over challenges, and his proof that hard work and persistence truly paid off. He felt a connection to every Marine who had walked this path before him, understanding the unspoken truth that being part of the military meant being part of a legacy. Among the crowd, he could see parents wiping away tears, friends sharing proud smiles, and fellow Marines exchanging nods of mutual respect. The atmosphere was electric, filled with admiration and celebration. Every step he took toward the stage felt like a step toward fulfillment, toward recognition of all the effort and sacrifice he had put into reaching this milestone. The Marine's heart swelled with gratitude, knowing that this moment was as much theirs as it was his family, his friends, and everyone who had supported him along the journey. Even as the Marine basked in the joy of the moment, there was a subtle undercurrent of tension he could not ignore. While the day was supposed to be a celebration, he could sense that not everyone might see it the same way. He shook off the thought, focusing instead on the positive energy surrounding him. Today was his day, and he was determined to make the most of it. The Marine knew that he had earned his place, that he had fought through every challenge, and that nothing could diminish the significance of his achievement. The ceremony was a symbol not just of personal success, but of resilience, discipline, and the unwavering spirit required to become a Marine. As he approached the stage, the Marine held his head high, shoulders squared and eyes forward. This was more than a ceremony. It was a testament to every struggle overcome, every obstacle faced, and every doubt conquered. He was ready to step into this new chapter of his life, proud of what he had accomplished and eager for what lay ahead. The cheers, the applause, and the smiles of those around him only strengthened his resolve. Today he was not just a Marine. He was a symbol of perseverance, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit. The excitement of the day was palpable, but as the Marine made his way through the crowd, something felt off. The bright smiles of family and friends suddenly seemed overshadowed by an unexpected tension. Out of nowhere, two uniformed guards stepped directly into his path, their expressions stern and unyielding. Their posture was rigid, almost threatening, and the Marine immediately sensed that this was not going to be a simple formality. Confused, he slowed down, trying to figure out what could possibly be wrong. After all, this was his graduation, his moment of triumph, and he had done nothing wrong. The guards, however, were firm. One of them, a tall man with a clipped tone, pointed toward the exit. "You need to leave," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally across the space. The Marine blinked, stunned, trying to process the words. "Leave? What do you mean?" he asked calmly, hoping that this was some kind of misunderstanding. But the guard repeated the command, his insistence now tinged with a hint of hostility. The Marine's heart sank. He had trained for years to defend his country, to face challenges on the battlefield. But this, he realized, was a challenge of a completely different nature, one that shook him to his core. As he stood there, trying to reason with the guards, he noticed the crowd beginning to murmur. People whispered to one another, their curiosity mixed with confusion. Some attendees moved closer, sensing that something was wrong, while others watched silently, unsure whether to intervene. The Marine could feel the eyes of family, friends, and fellow graduates upon him, each pair filled with a mix of disbelief and concern. He tried to explain, his voice steady but urgent. "I'm graduating today. I've earned this. I have every right to be here." The guards didn't budge. Their refusal seemed deliberate, almost personal, and a creeping sense of injustice began to take hold. The Marine felt a rush of anger, frustration, and disbelief, all emotions that were hard to control. He had faced countless obstacles before, grueling training sessions, punishing drills, and physical exhaustion, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. When someone questioned his place in a room where he had every right to be, the absurdity of the situation made his blood boil. How could they, of all people, challenge a Marine who had fought for his country, simply because of who he was? Tension rippled through the area. Friends tried to step forward, asking the guards to reconsider, but they were met with cold indifference. The Marine's family exchanged worried glances, their pride mingled with fear. They could see the injustice unfolding before them, yet they felt powerless to intervene. It was as if the celebration had suddenly been hijacked by an invisible force of unfairness, and the Marine, despite his strength and training, felt the weight of vulnerability pressing down on him. As the confrontation dragged on, the Marine's mind raced. He had been trained to assess situations, to think quickly, and to act decisively. But this was not a battlefield in the traditional sense. This was a battle of principle, a test of human decency, and the outcome was uncertain. The Marine realized that he would need support, not just for himself, but for the statement that needed to be made. Injustice would not go unchallenged. Each second that passed felt heavier, the air thick with anticipation. Onlookers began to hold their breath, the silence almost louder than the commotion had been. Then a thought struck him. He wasn't alone. Around him, the presence of other military personnel offered hope, though he didn't yet know who would step forward. His training had taught him to stay calm under pressure, and he focused on controlling his emotions, keeping his composure while the absurdity of the situation threatened to overwhelm him. The Marine squared his shoulders, lifted his chin, and prepared himself for what might come next. He had earned his place here, and he would not be denied, not without a fight. Little did he know the tide was about to turn. The guards, confident in their authority, did not realize that help was closer than they thought. Observers began to murmur among themselves, sensing that the Marine's dignity was at stake. This confrontation, which had started as a moment of confusion, was rapidly becoming a moment of reckoning. It was not just about one Marine anymore. It was about fairness, respect, and the values that every person in uniform, no matter their rank or role, was expected to uphold. And then, the first footsteps sounded across the hall, a calm, measured cadence, yet one that carried a weight far greater than any words could convey. Those approaching were not ordinary attendees. They were 6 Navy SEALs, elite warriors known for their precision, discipline, and unwavering courage. They had seen the confrontation unfold and understood immediately that something needed to be done. In that instant, the Marine realized that the situation was about to change, that the injustice he faced might finally meet the force of those who would not stand for it. The crowd had initially been buzzing with excitement, a wave of laughter, chatter, and applause filling the graduation hall. But as the confrontation between the Marine and the guards unfolded, that energy shifted dramatically. A sudden, uneasy silence replaced the cheers, and the atmosphere seemed to hold its breath. Attendees instinctively leaned forward, craning their necks to see what was happening. Parents clutched their children, friends exchanged bewildered glances, and fellow graduates paused mid-step, frozen by disbelief. Something was happening that no one had expected, and everyone could feel it. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, soft at first, then gradually growing louder. "Did he do something wrong?" one person asked, her voice tinged with confusion. "I don't think so," replied another, shaking his head. Eyes darted between the Marine and the guards, trying to decipher the situation. People began to sense the absurdity of the moment. The Marine was in full uniform, standing tall, proud of his achievement, yet being treated as if he didn't belong. The tension was palpable, like static in the air before a storm. Some witnesses stepped closer, curiosity overcoming hesitation. Parents quietly recorded the scene on their phones, unsure if they were capturing an embarrassing misunderstanding or something far more serious. Friends murmured encouragement to the Marine, their whispers a mix of support and disbelief. The murmurs grew, forming a collective question that hovered in the air. Why was this happening? Everyone in attendance could feel that something deeply unfair was taking place, and they couldn't help but react, even if only silently. Among the crowd, a few graduates exchanged determined glances. They had shared the same rigorous training, endured the same exhaustion, and pushed through the same grueling obstacles as the Marine in question. They understood what it meant to earn a place at this ceremony. Watching the Marine being challenged, they felt a surge of indignation rise within them. They whispered to each other, debating quietly about whether to step in, how to respond, or if they should wait and see how it would unfold. But the discomfort was contagious. No one could ignore the scene. Even the spectators from other branches of the military who had come to witness the ceremony paused to observe. Veterans, some with years of experience, frowned with disapproval. They recognized the wrongness of the moment immediately, sensing that the Marine's honor and the integrity of the ceremony itself was at stake. Their eyes narrowed, scanning the guard's posture, evaluating whether this confrontation was a simple misunderstanding or a more deliberate act of bias. The mood in the room shifted subtly, with tension spreading like ripples in water. The Marine himself could feel the energy of the crowd, the shifting balance between support and uncertainty. Each pair of eyes upon him was a reminder that the stakes were higher than he had anticipated. It was no longer just about following instructions or trying to reason with the guards. It was about upholding dignity and fairness in front of witnesses who were watching every moment, every movement, every expression. The Marine straightened his posture, holding his head high as if to silently communicate, "I belong here. I have earned this." Some audience members began to speak up, politely at first, questioning the guards. "Is this really necessary?" a parent asked. "He's graduating today. What's the problem?" Others expressed quiet disapproval, their voices carrying an edge of authority and respect. The guards, however, seemed unmoved by these attempts, maintaining their rigid stance and forcing the Marine to stand his ground. This only made the witnesses more restless, their admiration for the Marine growing with every moment of patience and composure he displayed. In the midst of all this, a few brave attendees captured photos and videos, instinctively knowing that this moment was extraordinary. It wasn't just a graduation anymore. It was a situation that revealed character, courage, and the dynamics of standing up against unfair treatment. Their recordings would later circulate, documenting the unfolding scene, but at that moment, the focus remained on the tension in the room, the delicate balance between authority, justice, and personal pride. The murmurs and glances eventually began to coalesce into a shared understanding. This confrontation was not right. People could feel the injustice like a tangible weight pressing down on the room. Eyes of the crowd followed every movement, tracking each subtle gesture, each subtle change in tone. Every person watching seemed to collectively hold their breath, waiting to see who would act, who would speak, and who would turn the tide. The Marine stood firm, and the crowd responded with silent solidarity, their attention a quiet but powerful force that seemed to bolster his courage. And then, as if the tension had summoned it, movement came from the edge of the room. Figures emerged from the background. 6 Navy SEALs whose presence immediately commanded respect. The witnesses' focus shifted, their whispers growing louder, their curiosity now tinged with hope. The crowd realized that someone of authority, skill, and unwavering confidence was stepping in. The balance in the room began to change, and the once tense silence carried a new energy. Anticipation of justice, the hope that fairness would finally prevail, and the undeniable realization that this Marine was not alone. The murmurs of the crowd had grown into a tense hum, a low vibration of anticipation and concern that filled the graduation hall. Eyes were fixed on the Marine, standing tall but tense, facing a confrontation he had never imagined. The guards remained rigid, confident in their authority, unaware that their challenge had just drawn the attention of 6 of the most elite warriors in the room. These were Navy SEALs, trained to read situations instantly, to assess threats and to act decisively, but not with recklessness. Their approach was calm, deliberate, and precise, each step measured with the authority of experience. As the SEALs entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but those who understood the presence of elite military personnel felt it immediately. There was a change in the air, a quiet tension that signaled power and control. The guards, once unwavering, now seemed slightly off balance, their postures tightening as they sensed something far greater than a mere disagreement unfolding. They had confronted one Marine thinking the situation was simple, but they hadn't anticipated what was about to come. The SEALs moved in with a silent authority that demanded attention. Each carried an aura of experience forged in the toughest conditions imaginable: missions in hostile territories, high-stakes operations, and life-or-death decisions made under pressure. But this was different. No enemy combatants, no battlefield, only a moment of injustice. Yet to them it mattered just as much. They recognized the wrongness of the act, the humiliation being inflicted, and the violation of honor. It was a call to action, one that required precision, calm judgment, and undeniable presence. Without raising their voices, the SEALs positioned themselves strategically. 2 flanked the Marine, forming a protective barrier while the others subtly approached the guards. Their presence alone was enough to command respect. The crowd noticed instantly, some stepping back slightly in awe, others holding their breath as they realized that the confrontation had escalated beyond words. The tension that had gripped the hall shifted, now tinged with a mix of anticipation and relief. Justice was arriving, not loudly, not aggressively, but with the quiet certainty that comes from true authority. One of the SEALs, the apparent leader, stepped forward, his stance calm yet unyielding. His eyes locked onto the guards, and without raising his voice, he communicated the seriousness of the moment. The guards, feeling the weight of his gaze and the unspoken authority of his presence, faltered. The silent power of experience, the kind that comes from a lifetime of facing danger and making split-second decisions, now confronted them. The Marine standing behind the SEALs felt a wave of relief. He was no longer alone. Support had arrived not in words but in action, in presence, in sheer command of respect. The SEALs spoke clearly and firmly, their tone calm but carrying absolute authority. "Step back. He has earned his place here. Let him continue." There was no room for negotiation, no room for arrogance. The words, simple yet firm, carried the weight of years of discipline, training, and moral clarity. The guards glanced at one another, uncertainty creeping in. Their rigid stance wavered as they realized that this confrontation had shifted into a situation they could no longer control. Witnesses in the crowd felt the shift immediately. Some whispered in awe, others exchanged looks of disbelief. The presence of 6 Navy SEALs, silent yet commanding, turned the tide in an instant. It was not a physical battle, yet it carried all the weight of one. The audience could feel the Marine's dignity being restored, even before any words were fully exchanged. The SEAL's intervention sent a clear message. Injustice would not be tolerated, not in this room, not in this moment. The Marine straightened, his chest swelling with pride and relief. The invisible barrier of intimidation that the guards had tried to create was shattered. The SEALs had done more than intervene. They had protected honor, upheld justice, and shown the power of solidarity. Every onlooker felt it, the gravity of elite warriors standing firmly for what was right, in a way that words alone could never convey. Finally, the guards, sensing the unmistakable authority of the SEALs and realizing that resistance was pointless, slowly stepped back. Their rigid expressions softened slightly, replaced by a reluctant acknowledgement. The Marine, flanked by his silent protectors, took a steady breath. He had been validated, supported, and his right to be there reaffirmed, not by argument, not by confrontation, but by the undeniable presence of those who understood the true meaning of courage, honor, and respect. The crowd erupted not with loud cheers, but with a wave of silent recognition, murmurs of respect and nods of approval. They had witnessed a moment where discipline, moral clarity, and elite skill had turned a moment of injustice into a powerful lesson in integrity. The SEALs stepped back, their mission complete, their presence leaving an invisible mark of courage and solidarity that no one in the room would soon forget. The room, once filled with quiet anticipation, now seemed charged with electricity. The presence of the 6 Navy SEALs had shifted the atmosphere, but it had not ended the confrontation. The guards, stubborn and unnerved, were still unwilling to fully back down. Their rigid posture wavered, their voices grew slightly harsher as if trying to reassert authority. But each word they uttered fell flat against the silent, commanding presence of the SEALs. It was clear to everyone in the room. This was no longer a simple disagreement. It was a battle of wills, a test of courage, integrity, and respect. The Marine, standing at the center, felt his pulse quicken. He had trained for moments of intense pressure, but this was different. This was psychological, social, moral, a confrontation that demanded patience, composure, and quiet strength. He glanced at the SEALs, who remained calm, their eyes unwavering, their stance unshakable. Their presence gave him reassurance, but it also reminded him that the moment was serious. Every second mattered. Every word, every gesture could tip the balance. The guards, sensing their control slipping, became more insistent. "You don't belong here," one of them snapped, pointing a finger toward the exit. His tone carried an edge, the kind that comes from fear masked as authority. "Step aside," the other added, trying to regain dominance. But the SEALs moved subtly, closing the gap, their positioning deliberate. They were not aggressive, but their movements were precise, a silent message that they were ready to act if necessary. Their calm confidence contrasted sharply with the guards' faltering composure, making it increasingly clear who held the real power in the room. Witnesses could feel the tension thickening. Parents gripped their children's hands, friends leaned forward in anticipation, and fellow graduates instinctively straightened, drawn into the drama unfolding before them. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you see that? Those are Navy SEALs! And I can't believe they're here. He's going to be okay." The room was collectively holding its breath, watching authority, courage, and justice collide. The Marine could almost hear the silent support radiating from the crowd, each onlooker unconsciously lending strength to his resolve. The SEALs spoke again, this time their voices calm but carrying undeniable authority. "Step back. This Marine has earned his place here. There is no reason for further conflict." Their words were like steel, firm and unyielding, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The guards hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Their earlier confidence was cracking under the weight of silent power and moral clarity. It was no longer a matter of who had authority and title. It was a matter of who commanded respect. And everyone could see the truth. The Marine, encouraged by the SEALs, lifted his chin and squared his shoulders. His own voice joined the chorus of authority, calm but unwavering. "I have earned this. I am graduating today. I belong here." The words, simple yet resolute, reinforced what the SEALs had already communicated. He would not be intimidated or removed unjustly. The crowd sensed the Marine's courage, feeling it radiate outward, strengthening the collective energy in the room. Every pair of eyes followed the drama, invested in the outcome, knowing that fairness and dignity were hanging in the balance. The guards, realizing they were facing more than just one Marine, became defensive. They attempted to justify their actions, citing rules and procedures, but their explanations were weak and unconvincing. The SEALs, unmoved, maintained eye contact, their presence a living reminder that authority without justice is meaningless. Their subtle, deliberate gestures, Slight shifts in stance, measured hand movements, communicated readiness and resolve without the need for shouting or threats. The Marine drew confidence from their composure, understanding that courage was often quiet but unshakable. Time seemed to stretch. Every heartbeat, every movement, every exchange of words felt magnified. The confrontation intensified not through violence, but through psychological pressure and moral clarity. The SEALs' silent power loomed large, forcing the guards to confront the fact that they were wrong. The audience, sensing the climax approaching, became more engaged, their whispers now a low, expectant hum. The tension in the room was palpable, like the calm before a storm, a moment frozen in anticipation of justice being served. Finally, one guard's hand trembled slightly. He looked around, sensing the growing support for the Marine, the unyielding resolve of the SEALs, and the collective awareness of the witnesses. The balance had shifted irreversibly. He realized that persistence would no longer help him assert authority. It would only highlight his mistake. The confrontation had reached its peak, the moment where decisions mattered most, and every subtle cue in the room signaled that the Marine would not be moved. The Marine, flanked by the SEALs, felt a surge of quiet triumph. He had stood firm, demonstrating dignity and courage in the face of unfair treatment. The crowd, witnessing the intensity of the confrontation, began to relax slightly, a sense of collective relief washing over them. The guards, finally recognizing the futility of their actions, stepped back, conceding the moment. The SEALs, without a word, allowed the Marine to reclaim his rightful place. The tension that had gripped the hall for what felt like an eternity began to dissolve, replaced by admiration, respect, and the quiet thrill of justice upheld. The room seemed to exhale collectively as the tension finally began to lift. The guards, once imposing and rigid, had stepped back, their attempts to intimidate the Marine completely undone by the silent authority of the SEALs. The Marine, standing tall and composed, could feel the weight of the moment shift from confrontation to triumph. It was a victory not just for him, but for fairness, integrity, and the invisible principle that no one should ever be made to feel less than they deserve. The SEALs, their presence unwavering until the last second, subtly relaxed, signaling that the immediate threat had passed. Their eyes, still sharp and alert, scanned the room, ensuring that the resolution was clear and that the Marine's dignity remained intact. Even in their quiet, controlled manner, their influence was unmistakable. Respect had been restored, authority had been correctly asserted, and justice had quietly, but definitively been served. The Marine drew a deep breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over him, knowing that he could now fully embrace the moment he had worked so hard to reach. Witnesses reacted immediately. Murmurs of approval spread throughout the crowd, quietly at first, then growing louder. Parents exchanged proud glances, some whispering words of encouragement to their own children, while friends clapped discreetly, celebrating the Marine's courage and the SEALs' intervention. The crowd, once tense with confusion and anxiety, now hummed with admiration, as though they had witnessed a small but powerful battle between injustice and honor, and seen justice prevail. The Marine's family approached him, their faces glowing with relief and pride. Tears welled in the eyes of his mother and father, and his siblings could barely contain their excitement. They hugged him tightly, their embrace a mixture of love, pride, and a shared understanding of what he had endured. It was a moment they would remember forever, not just for the celebration of his graduation, but for the powerful lesson they had witnessed, that courage, integrity, and the support of those who stand with you can turn even the most unjust situations around. Even the SEALs allowed themselves a subtle nod of acknowledgement toward the Marine, a quiet recognition of his composure under pressure. They didn't need words. Their presence and actions had already spoken volumes. The Marine, sensing this, felt a surge of gratitude. It was not just about being defended. It was about being seen, respected, and validated in front of everyone present. The weight of injustice that had pressed down on him only moments before was gone, replaced with a feeling of empowerment and belonging. The guards, now fully aware that their actions had been wrong, remained silent. They could not undo what had happened, nor could they diminish the impact of the Marine's steadfastness and the SEAL's intervention. Slowly, they stepped aside, completely, allowing the Marine to continue toward the stage. Their retreat was not just physical, it was symbolic. Authority had been challenged and integrity had won. Every step the Marine took now carried not just pride, but a quiet triumph over unfairness and bias. The ceremony resumed, but the energy in the room had changed permanently. The Marine, now fully confident in his rightful place, walked with a sense of purpose and pride. His peers followed in formation, some glancing his way with subtle nods of respect, acknowledging the courage he had displayed. The SEALs, having ensured the situation was resolved, quietly moved back to their places, blending into the background yet leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had witnessed their intervention. As the Marine received his diploma, the applause was louder, more heartfelt and more meaningful than any he had heard before. It wasn't just a celebration of completing rigorous training. It was a recognition of resilience, strength, and the undeniable victory of justice over intimidation. Every handshake, every smile, every nod carried the weight of acknowledgement, not only of his achievement but of the courage he had shown in the face of an unjust challenge. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the story of what had just occurred lingered in the air, like an invisible echo. Conversations erupted in hushed tones. People recounted the bravery of the Marine, the calm but commanding intervention of the SEALs, and the ultimate lesson that injustice can be challenged and corrected when courage, solidarity, and integrity come together. The Marine, surrounded by his supporters and mentors, felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The moment had transcended a mere graduation. It had become a powerful testament to fairness, honor, and the value of standing up for what is right. In that moment, the Marine realized that the victory was not just personal, it was universal. It was proof that courage and integrity, even when challenged by authority or prejudice, can prevail. The SEALs had reminded everyone present that true strength is not measured solely by physical ability or rank, but by the unwavering commitment to doing what is right, defending others, and ensuring that justice is served. This day, which began with uncertainty and tension, ended as a lasting symbol of honor, respect, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. The ceremony had ended, but the echoes of what had just transpired lingered in the minds of everyone present. The Marine stood quietly for a moment, letting the adrenaline fade, absorbing the significance of what had happened. It wasn't just the celebration of completing rigorous training. It was a profound reminder of courage, justice, and solidarity. He reflected on the moment with a quiet intensity, replaying the confrontation in his mind. The guard's rigid authority, the murmurs of the crowd, the unwavering presence of the SEALs. Every detail reminded him that true strength was not only physical, it was moral, emotional, and resolute. His thoughts drifted to the SEALs who had acted without hesitation or showiness. They had intervened not for glory, not for recognition, but because they understood the value of defending what was right. Their calm authority, their silent power, had turned an unfair confrontation into a lesson for everyone present. The Marine felt gratitude, not only for being protected but for witnessing firsthand the kind of courage that doesn't need applause. It simply acts. This realization deepened his respect for those who serve, who fight not only in battlefields, abroad, but in moments like these, defending principles at home. Family and friends gathered around him, their faces full of pride and relief. His parents held his hands tightly, eyes glistening with tears, as though the weight of every struggle he had endured was being celebrated in that single moment. His siblings crowded close, their smiles wide, whispering words of admiration and encouragement. The Marine realized that his journey had always been shared, that every challenge he had faced had been supported by the people who believed in him, even when he doubted himself. Today's victory was theirs, as much as it was his. The whispers of the crowd lingered, and conversations slowly began to form around the story. Witnesses recounted the confrontation in low, awed tones, sharing the details with anyone who would listen. The Marine heard phrases like, "Did you see how the SEALs handled it?" and "He stood so tall. I've never seen anyone so composed under pressure." Strangers, who had come merely to watch a graduation, now carried a story of courage, fairness, and resilience with them. It was the kind of story that would be retold, shared, and remembered, not just because of the drama, but because of the deeper lesson it imparted. The Marine himself felt a quiet sense of pride, not arrogance, but a deep, resonant pride that came from knowing he had maintained his dignity under pressure. He thought about the long hours of training, the early mornings, the physical exhaustion, and the mental challenges that had prepared him for this very moment. Every push-up, every drill, every moment of doubt had built more than his body. It had strengthened his spirit. And in facing this unexpected challenge, he realized that the lessons of perseverance extended beyond physical endurance. They were lessons in patience, courage, and integrity. The SEALs, having quietly observed the aftermath, began to blend back into the crowd, their presence a subtle reminder of the support that had been provided. They had acted decisively but without fanfare, letting the Marine reclaim his spotlight. Watching them retreat, the Marine understood something profound. Heroes often do not seek recognition. Their actions are felt, remembered, and respected precisely because they are selfless, because they act out of principle rather than for applause. He resolved to carry this lesson with him, not just in his career but in life. Even the guards, now distanced and subdued, became part of the story in their own way. Their failure to assert unjust authority served as a lesson about accountability and respect. The Marine noticed the subtle change in their demeanor, the recognition that they had been wrong, and the realization that true authority is earned, not demanded. Their retreat was silent acknowledgement of a principle far greater than rank or title. Justice and fairness always matter more. As the crowd dispersed, the Marine lingered, looking around at the faces of those who had witnessed the moment. He noticed the subtle nods of respect, the lingering looks of admiration, and the quiet conversations that revolved around the courage displayed. This reflection filled him with a sense of purpose beyond the ceremony itself. He realized that his story, their story, was now part of a larger narrative, a lesson in resilience, dignity, and the power of standing firm in the face of injustice. The Marine took a final deep breath, feeling a quiet but profound satisfaction. He understood that today was not merely about personal achievement. It was about recognition, solidarity, and the demonstration of values that transcend uniforms, ranks, and titles. Today he had witnessed the extraordinary, courage in action, justice upheld, and respect earned. And in that moment of reflection, he knew that this day would remain etched in memory, not just his own, but in the hearts of everyone who had seen it unfold. The hall had slowly emptied, the echoes of applause and whispered conversations fading into a quiet hum. Yet the energy of the day lingered, a lingering warmth that refused to be erased. The Marine stood alone for a moment, looking around at the seats, the empty stage, and the subtle signs of a day that had become far more than a simple graduation ceremony. Today had transformed into a story of courage, justice, and the unbreakable human spirit, a story that would be remembered far beyond the walls of this room. He reflected on every detail. The tension when the guards confronted him, the crowd holding its breath, the calm but powerful presence of the 6 Navy SEALs. He thought of the lessons that had revealed themselves in those moments. Bravery is not only measured by physical feats, but by standing firm for what is right. True strength is not loud or boastful, it is quiet, unwavering, and principled. And the greatest acts of heroism are often not performed on distant battlefields, but in moments that demand integrity, courage, and moral clarity. As he gathered his things and prepared to leave, he noticed the expressions of those around him. Parents were sharing stories with their children. Friends were replaying the incident with a mix of awe and admiration, and fellow graduates were quietly nodding in respect. The Marine realized that this day had become a lesson for everyone who witnessed it. It was a demonstration that injustice can be challenged, that courage inspires, and that the right action, no matter how simple or silent, can have a ripple effect far beyond a single individual. He remembered the SEALs, their calm decisiveness and silent authority. Their intervention had not been flashy or attention-seeking. Instead, it had been a testament to the power of moral clarity. They had stepped in not for recognition, but because they understood the responsibility of standing up for what is right. The Marine felt an overwhelming gratitude, not just for their protection, but for the lesson they had imparted, that the right path is not always the easiest, but it is always the most honorable. The story of the confrontation and its resolution began to take root in the minds of the witnesses. Conversations continued, photos and videos circulated, and the narrative of justice upheld began to spread. Yet the Marine understood that the true significance of the day was not in being seen or celebrated, it was in the principle that had been proven. Courage is contagious, integrity is visible, and support for what is right can turn moments of injustice into enduring lessons. He had learned that standing firm, even when challenged, carries a weight far greater than immediate recognition. It shapes character, earns respect, and inspires others to act with bravery. As he stepped outside into the sunlight, the Marine felt a sense of calm triumph. The day had tested him in ways he had never anticipated, yet he had emerged stronger, more aware, and more confident in his ability to face both expected and unforeseen challenges. The crowd, now dispersing into the world beyond the ceremony hall, carried with them the memory of what had occurred. The story would be retold countless times, each retelling a reinforcement of courage, fairness, and the importance of standing for one's principles. The Marine knew that the impact of today would extend far beyond him. The lessons witnessed by family, friends, fellow graduates, and even strangers would continue to influence thoughts and actions long after the applause faded. He understood that heroism is not only about extraordinary feats, but also about everyday acts of standing up for justice, supporting others, and acting with honor. The SEAL's intervention, the crowd's silent support, and his own steadfastness had created a narrative that would inspire countless others to recognize their own power, to act with integrity. In the quiet moments before leaving, the Marine reflected on a larger truth. Life is full of unexpected challenges, moments when right and wrong collide, and circumstances that test not only physical strength but character. Today had been one of those moments. He had witnessed firsthand how courage, solidarity, and principle could transform a situation of injustice into a story of triumph. This realization stayed with him, embedding itself into his sense of purpose, guiding him toward the future with a renewed understanding of responsibility, leadership, and honor. Finally, as he walked away from the hall, the Marine carried more than his diploma. He carried the memory of a day when courage met justice, when support met necessity, and when the truth of integrity shone brighter than intimidation. Today had been a lesson, a story, and a reminder that even in the face of unfairness, there is always a way to rise above, to stand firm, and to inspire others. And in that moment, he understood the enduring moral of the story. Bravery is timeless, honor is universal, and standing up for what is right can change not just one life, but the lives of everyone who witnesses it.